Kia ora koutou, and welcome everyone to this month's BNZ webinar. So I'm Katie Bruce, and this is Michelle Kitney, and we're from Volunteering New Zealand. And we run, we're just pressing the record button so that we don't forget. Because what we do every month is we record these webinars so that anyone who couldn't make it can watch them back, and they're available on our website. So feel free to share those. So we do them every month with a different topic, and this month you've got Michelle and I talking you through a volunteer study that we did across the search and rescue sector. So we're really pleased to be able to share that with you today. And a couple of other things just before we start. So our conference tickets for our Pivot conference in October have already half sold. So please do get in there quick to make sure that you secure your place if you want to. And also our membership runs from the 1st of July every year. So it's a really good time to join if your organisation isn't already a member, because not only do you then benefit from those member benefits for the whole year, but also you get discounts to our conference if that's something that you're interested in. And this will be my last webinar, because I finish up at Volunteering New Zealand at the end of next week. So I just wanted to take the quick chance now before I forget at the end to say thank you to everyone for your support over the time that I've been here, and I'm sure that you will continue to support the amazing Michelle, who'll be our interim chief executive. So thank you. As we go, please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A, and we'll do a little bit of a presentation to start with, and then we will get to those a bit later on. And also, I guess, just to note that we can share about the methodology, about the findings, about how that might relate to broader trends, but what we won't be able to do, obviously, is speak on behalf of any of these organisations and speak to their operational matters or how they're taking things forward, although there may well be others in the group who are from those organisations. So thank you for coming, and also thank you for your openness and willingness to be a part of that study. Thank you. Great, so we've got just a little slide here. I'm sure that most of you are well aware of Volunteering New Zealand and what we do. So we're the peak body for volunteering. We're here to make sure that volunteering, the value of volunteering is recognised, to advocate for inclusive, ethical, supported and impactful volunteering, and to lead volunteering and support in sessions like today. And yeah, so I'm just going to pass over to Michelle to talk you through and introduce the study.
Kia ora koutou. We were the work that we did was we were engaged to produce a report for, or a program of work for NZSAR, and that involved 4 volunteer workforce reports for the 4 key volunteer organisations within the New Zealand SAR sector. So that's Surf Life Saving New Zealand, LandSAR, Coast Guards and AREC, which is Amateur Radio Emergency Controllers, which are one of the smaller ones, but they do vital work for the whole sector. The methodology that we used in producing the reports was desk-based research, a significant number of one-on-one interviews with people from each of the 4 organisations and key stakeholders. We also rolled out an individualised InvolveMe surveys for each of the 4 organisations, and as the reports were produced, we sought feedback on the draft findings and did workshops with the organisations to sound that out. And all the work for the 4 reports was then collated together into the NZSAR report.
And that one's available publicly. So the individual reports, you'd have to contact the individual organisations to see, but the main SAR report, we've promoted it through our newsletters, and it's also on the NZSAR website.
Yeah, and so what we're talking about today is what stuff that comes out of that report, but the 4 sub-reports culminates into the NZSAR report. So we used the InvolveMe 360 survey as part of our research, and that has 4 categories within it: strategy, culture, tools and resources, and communication. So that gives a really good opportunity for diving deeper into what people on the ground experiences are in relation to those key areas. So that's the 4 key reports. So it just reflects that there's quite a bit of work that went into coming to the final report for NZSAR. So Katie's going to speak through some of the findings in relation to the report. The findings. I'm going to talk about the recommendations at the end. What we want to draw attention to is the trends that kind of sit outside that impact on the findings and the recommendations. So these are relevant to everybody across the sector. We know that there has been a 42% decrease in actual volunteer hours worked, but at the same time, we're seeing more people actually coming into the sector and doing volunteering. And there's another trend, the 14% of volunteers that do half of all the hours volunteered is a trend that we're seeing overseas as well. So there's a term for that, which is the civic core. So the civic core are doing 50% of the work, and there's only 14% of them doing it. So the wider trend that we're seeing that impacts significantly across the sector, but also into this report and findings, is sort of taking out of those numbers that we've just looked at. Atomization, we're seeing more people doing less, so it's bite-sized, chunked out sort of volunteering. We feel that the civic core, an issue for them is potentially burnout. There's a small number of people doing a lot of the volunteering hours. We know that there is trends towards episodic, micro, project-based volunteering, and how people want to engage with volunteering is changing, and demographics are also changing quite quickly. So we're seeing more young people, more seniors, and a growth in recent migrants. So there's lots of changes happening that contextualize this report in volunteering.
And in fact, an example to share with you, which is that we have volunteers, and we can use the example of Netflix to think about how so often now, what we want to do, what we want to watch is on demand. We can choose when we watch it and how we watch it, and what we watch at any time that we want to. And so I guess what's interesting is if life is becoming more like Netflix, on demand, customized, endless choice and decisions to make, this is actually very different to search and rescue volunteering. Now, bear with me with this metaphor. So if Netflix is available wherever and whenever, search and rescue is obviously on demand, but in a very different way. Netflix, you can skip straight to the battle scenes if you want to, but with search and rescue, you can get some real life action, but the majority of the time is spent training and preparing and getting yourselves ready for any situation that you might be needed for. And in Netflix, you have a full choice of genres. You can only watch sci-fi if you want to, but in search and rescue and in a lot of volunteering, if you want the action or the sci-fi, you need to take on administration and often governance roles too, and fundraising and all of those other things. So yeah, I just wanted to share that with you. But basically, these trends have a particular impact on the search and rescue sector because of how reliant they are on volunteers. So you can see here that there's actually, on average, there are over 98% volunteers, which is not something necessarily to aim for, but what it does is it demonstrates how reliant the sector is on volunteers, but not just volunteers, but volunteers who are regular and long-term. And as Michelle's just said, those are the things that are going in the opposite direction to the trends of how people want to spend their time when they volunteer. So that poses a particular challenge for search and rescue, and obviously for some of our other types of volunteering in other parts of the sector as well, who are the same. So, and this isn't just about future prediction and what might happen in the future in terms of those trends. So if we go to the next one, you know, look at these figures, for example. So this is taken from Coast Guard, and Coast Guard have shared this. And you can see the number of people joining the organisation, the number of volunteers who are joining over the years. So back from 2013 up to 2017. But then you can also see underneath the number of volunteers who are exiting in that year. So you can see down at the bottom, for every volunteer joining, there are 4 volunteers leaving in 2017. And those sorts of things, you know, are real alarm bells to those, you know, who are managing the organisation, because it's really clear that for future sustainability, there needs to be something done a little bit differently. And actually, Coast Guard provide the most amazing training opportunities. You know, you don't ever have to set foot but you can start your, so they're really around because of doing some really proactive workforce development. And the first step really is even knowing this information, because they're made up of tiny units all around the country. So actually being aware of this situation and then being able to move on from there, take that proactive approach. And I think with AREC, they are an example of what can happen if you lose your critical mass, or if you don't have, or from the government around you, or you don't have those resources, that they face some real challenges around key volunteers leaving and being and having all of the institutional knowledge. But also really great to see that now they've taken on their first paid member of staff, which is really exciting for them. So I think what became really clear is that investment in the infrastructure and the support for volunteering is not only good practice, but it's really vital in a sector that's providing life-saving services like this one. So if we move on to the next one. So just to share with you a little bit, you know, facing up to these challenges in this sector means facing up to a workforce that is predominantly male, pale and over 40. So if we look at who we've got here, in general in volunteering, actually women are overrepresented. There are more women volunteering than men in general. But if we look across on the right-hand side at search and rescue, it's actually 3/4 of the people volunteering in search and rescue are men. And that probably isn't very surprising, given you know, that those sectors, along with police and other emergency services, are dominated by male workers in general. And if you look down the bottom, you can just see, you know, the general population, there are roughly half and half, and then across the organisation. So in surf lifesaving, that is not the picture. It's actually far more even, but in organisations like AREC, it is almost all men. So if we move on to look at age. The general population that you can see at the top, and just to note that I noticed a typo, which is my fault. On the right hand side at the very top where it says percentage, it should say under 20, not over 20, so that's our youngest category there. So you can see in volunteering, if you compare the volunteering population, the second bar along, against the general population, that older people are more likely to volunteer, and that won't be a surprise to any of you. But what might be a surprise, given the physical nature of the search and rescue activities, is that the search and rescue volunteers is not very different to the general volunteering population in terms of their age range, especially if you take out surf lifesaving, because surf lifesaving are a real anomaly in this age picture again, because most of their volunteers are young. That's different when you look at who volunteers in terms of their search and rescue operations. It's actually an older category. But if you look at their volunteers overall, they are a really young group. So if you take them out, then you can see that actually that this is much older population there, with actually half of all the volunteers across New Zealand in search and rescue being over 50. And then, so this was information that came from the organisations themselves, so they knew this, but this was putting it together. But what we did for the first time was look at ethnicity, and we looked at ethnicity through our InvolveMe survey. So we customised it so that it had some particular questions that the organisations were interested in, as well as some additional demographic information, so ethnicity here. And so again, we've got the general population. So on that graph, you can see that the general population is in purple. So 74% of the general population in New Zealand are European, 15% Māori, 7% Pacifica, 12% Asian, and 3% other. But the picture across all of the search and rescue organisations was pretty consistent, which is that, these are predominantly European volunteers. So Europeans are overrepresented, and Māori, Pacifica, Asian, and are underrepresented in terms of volunteers. So they're a pretty Pākehā bunch of volunteers without too much diversity in who they're attracting as their volunteers. So, and I think that what that does is it raises some opportunities, and there are some challenges, but it also raises opportunities in thinking much more broadly about who might be interested in volunteering in search and rescue. So clearly, sustainability of an almost exclusively volunteer workforce relies on engaging a new generation in ways that are meaningful to them, and remembering that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So yes, but one thing I did want to share with you is an example that was actually shared as part of our that we launched National Volunteer Week this year, and you can see it's just on our website, and you can have a look at all the stories from around the country of what volunteers are up to. And this was one that was sent in. So this is Peter. You can see Peter at the back, and he's the founder and club coordinator of the country's newest surf lifesaving club, the Ngāti Porou Surf Lifesaving Club, up on the East Coast. And I think what this does is it's a really nice example of some of the really innovative and inspiring things that are happening within these organisations that we're talking to you about, because that's just the overall picture. There are all sorts of great things happening. And so what he did is he could see in Surf Lifesaving New Zealand that the water safety message and that the skills that were needed in his community were already there. So what he decided to do was provide opportunities for young people to gain leadership experience. So they formed a partnership with the local kura kaupapa. So the teachers are becoming lifeguards, and they teach lifeguard skills through the club. And he said that calling it the Ngāti Porou Surf Lifesaving Club was a deliberate choice, because normally it's named after the beach. He said because it didn't isolate us to the beach, but it opened us up to the whole Ngāti Porou area, and was a strategic move to say the club is open to everyone, and particularly opening the door to those descended from Ngāti Porou, and putting that message out there. And his intention is to come towards surf lifesaving from a cultural perspective. And he said it's taken a little while for the idea of lifeguarding to catch up in our iwi, because the idea is seen as a mainstream Pākehā thing. And this is a big challenge when you've got an organisation that is already seen in a particular way for a particular group of people, you know, going about changing that is a challenge. So it's really interesting to hear his perspective. He says, but I say it is us because of our ocean culture. We're not just people of the land, we're people of the sea, and it's culturally more inviting. And so they qualified 18 new guards this season, and he's seeing young people that they've trained win awards and grow, and so that seems like a really great success story. So I just wanted to share a little example there of something that's going on with NZSAR.
So there were lots of really awesome things that were happening across the 4 organisations, but we did write up some fairly robust recommendations, and you can read them in their entirety on the report, which is available on the NZSAR site. We primarily, one of the key things we've recommended is that the sector devise a set of guiding principles that guide volunteer involvement within their sector, and then after that we would like to see each of the 4 organisations develop volunteer strategies for the organisations. Now I should note that I know that lots of good work is already happening around these things, so some of the stuff's already starting to happen, and we kind of made it explicit that there is a need for investment to support volunteer management practice and training, which obviously is distinct from other organisational management. We've pointed out there's opportunities for advocacy, potentially around further work around how volunteer organisations or the sector engages with employers of volunteers, and we also kind of focused in on leadership training specifically, that there's some really good stuff that's already happening in the sector, but cross-sector volunteer leadership training, so across the multiple organisations, would be really beneficial, and with also a specific focus on youth leadership training for young or youth within the organisations. So I guess it's sort of trying to help build succession planning. One of the key things we've sort of suggested that the strategies could address is specific plans around diversity, and sort of to support that we've made a sort of an operational suggestion of having a general set of volunteer data, workforce data collected across the sector so they can benchmark and see where they're going and make plans for the future. So those are our key recommendations.
Yeah, only that when I was, I popped over to the Search and Rescue, the Australia and New Zealand conference in Australia recently, and met there a few of the young volunteers who are with NZSAR, and it was really great to hear some of the innovations that they're coming up with that will actually change the way that search and rescue might be carried out, and providing and doing some really awesome things, but not always being welcomed with open arms, or not seeing a place for them within some of those other more mainstream volunteer groups. So that's something to really kind of to bear in mind. Yeah, so so that's a little bit about the study and what we found. So it'd be good to hear from any of you if you've got any questions of anything that you'd like to, anything else that you'd like to find out about from us, or anything based on what we've said, or any ideas that you have. Does it resonate? Does these sorts of things also ring true or sound familiar, or is it just? And that's the thing with volunteering, is that some of it is, you know, we really can feel, yes, we have though, even though the sector that we work in is so different, we can really relate. And sometimes, because volunteering is as diverse as work, and more so, that actually you know, it's understanding that there are some real differences within the sector as well.
If there's anyone from the 4 organisations who wants to be promoted to panellist, just put your hand up if you want. That's another option, or please feel free to put questions through the Q&A. Oh,
there's someone.
Edward. Here's. Oh.
Okay, so was it Edward?
Are you putting your hand up to talk, Edward?
Edward Jackson? Yeah. Okay. So we've just added Edward. If you just unmute yourself, you'll be able to speak. And we've also had a question through from Steve Campbell, who says, "Where to from here, Katie? We've had similar results in the 2009 NZSAR report." Yes, that's a really, really good point, because what happened is that there was a report 10 years before our report that did raise a lot of the similar kind of issues around sustainability. And what has happened since then is that the volunteer trends are increasing and speeding up. So actually we're at a point now where that is even more critical than it was before. And what's been really awesome, I guess, is the response so far from NZSAR. They accepted all of the recommendations and they're putting a plan in place. So I think that is really heartening to hear. And we were surprised, I guess, by the level of support from the organisations themselves. It was really awesome to have that and to be able to provide a platform for them to put these concerns and these findings up to their funders. So, yeah.
There's another question down here from Trish Clark. Do any of the volunteer centres currently recruit or advertise for SAR? I don't know off the top of my head, like universally, but I do know that Gisborne has quite a close relationship with the LANSAR team up there, so I think there's some cross-pollination there, but it's an opportunity actually.
Yeah, and I think for some, you know, for each organisation, it's slightly different, because some of them do have recruitment challenges in some areas and some of them don't, and it's so varied. And some of them actually have far more volunteers than they need in terms of the number of search and rescues in an area. But I think that's a really great, I think it would be great for those organisations to make sure that they are connected in with their local volunteer centre, who can provide really great support.
But yeah, it's not always an issue of recruitment. It's about training, length of service and other factors as well as recruitment for the sector.
Yeah, so we've got a question here about, as a responder with NZRT, the issue I find hard is to be able them to let us go for deployment. So I think this is around employers, employers being supportive of volunteering, and this is something that we did raise with NZSAR, because it's not like you can book in for you know, on a roster for when suits you. When you're needed is when you're needed, and you have to go, and that's a real challenge. So I don't know if we have any answers, but it's something that we have really flagged.
Yeah, and it was a question going into the study that NZSAR wanted some data on. So we did use the InvolveMe survey to try and flesh out that, get some data and come up with some findings. I guess there's not pockets of really great things happening in individual areas in terms of relationships between employers and particular SAR organisations, but and also outside of the sector, the FENS, they've got some good relationships in local areas with local brigades, but there's definitely some work to.
They're developing an actual sort of employer scheme, aren't they?
They have started.
Yeah, but I guess what we did find, perhaps surprisingly, was that most people surveyed said that their employer was very supportive of their volunteering and let them go whenever they needed to, which was more supportive, I guess, than NZSAR were perhaps expecting. Yeah, so Trisha's asked about the statistics about FEN's demographics, and that's an interesting one. I don't know. Do you know?
Not off the top of my head. It'd be interesting to compare.
It would, because often, you know, there's also an overlap because some people who volunteer with FENS also volunteer with other search and rescue organisations. But yeah, that's a good one. They probably do have that data because they've got a good team there. And Ray pointing out that each NZSAR group recruits and manages their own volunteers. Yes.
So Ray is in the main office at NZSAR.
Yes.
Thank you, Ray.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. And also, but it'd be great, you know, for all of these groups to know that the volunteer centres are there if they need them. And Edward's sort of saying, you know, working for a small company, which is obviously really challenging when, you know, if there are employer schemes, they're going to be with the bigger ones. So that's a real challenge. Yeah. Okay.
Great question from Karen Smith, pointing out that the report has really interesting insights into the search and rescue organisations. And what do we see as the key learnings for organisations in other areas of volunteering? I think looking at the general trends is key, but also looking at those pictures around with the demographics and who is making up New Zealand and who makes up our volunteer workforce, and taking that on board and assessing where they might, does the population look like, does their volunteer workforce look like it's in the same situation?
Yeah, I think what it does for me, like you were saying, is it's kind of, it says it's really important to know who your volunteers are and what motivates them, and if you are running a model that might be sustainable into the future, so that at least you know, I guess, your organisation's risk around volunteering. So I think actually looking at the demographics of who your volunteers are, if you're a big organisation, can be really useful, and to look at how you compare with other organisations and what they might be doing, because I think if you're only getting to a certain group of the population, then that raises real questions, because in search and rescue, it's not that women aren't interested in doing search and rescue, but it might be that there are things around the culture or the organisation or this type of work that means that there are barriers to women getting involved. And I
was just going to add that the making visible the reliance of how much volunteer work actually goes on for this sector and other organisations, and making sure we value it, resource it, fund it, celebrate it.
And that was one message we really wanted to get across strongly, because you know, actually volunteer management isn't resourced in this sector at all. So we've really been pushing to say that, you know, these organisations have lots of great ideas of things that they want to achieve. It's not that anyone's short of ideas, but really short of resources, particularly. Yeah. And I guess one other thing too is that other organisations may not be doing the same types of activities, but if you rely really heavily on long-term volunteers who come in regularly every week, then just to note that really does go against the trends that we're seeing. So thinking about your future sustainability and the flexibility that you could be offering, will be really important. Okay, a challenging one from Steve. So what things could help the existing federation organisation model rolling out a national volunteer strategy and help cultural change?
Yeah. I think our key recommendations around starting with a set of agreed principles for the sector for volunteer engagement and involvement. So the sector is working towards the same set of underpinning values, and then actually each of the 4 organisations creating their own volunteer strategies and getting the buy-in of their organisations for the strategy, and then yeah, that's where we've recommended that they start.
And then Edward says, I feel that there's not a lot of exposure or advertising campaigns for these kinds of organisations. You know, where you look at the likes of police and FENS, you know, they do have that kind of visibility at the national level. And I think you are so right. I think that we definitely put in some recommendations into the individual reports about kind of getting the message out there. I don't think that people around New Zealand even know that these organisations are so reliant on volunteers and wouldn't think to actually to join up, and they offer really interesting opportunities and training. So that's something that I think I really, really agree. Again, you know, police and FENS are going to have a bigger budget to be able to do those sorts of things. So that's a challenge.
I think what we saw and what other people might see when you look at media is they actually do a really great job at making the most of media opportunities in relation to you know, safety messages and things like that. But it's we have primed them with the opportunity to maybe overlay those communications with making evident the volunteer element of it a bit more.
Yeah, so recently we had an opportunity to do a bit of a podcast on volunteering, which was focusing on lots of the issues and challenges that are faced. And so we were able to support Coast Guard to really and have their say on what's affecting them, and that actually got onto Morning Report on Radio New Zealand, so that was really great.
And that was drawing on stuff from our reports. So,
yes. Okay, any other, just looking to see if there's any that we haven't answered. Don't think so. Give you a last couple of minutes if there's anything else, any other burning questions that you'd like to ask. But I'd really encourage you to either get in touch with the individual organisations if you are interested in finding out more or have any particular questions or want to know what they're up to, or reading the full report online.
But one last or another question. Oh, it's someone probably volunteering to get involved, so no, they connect you separately, Esperanza.
All right. I guess just as a final point, that it really, for me, hammers home the point that a lot of funders and government don't actually recognise how to resource volunteers and assume that volunteering is free. And so what we try to do in this report, and that we'll try to do in other work that we do, is to really demonstrate the nature of what volunteering is actually being done, how reliant the sector is on it, and how it could better be resourced and supported going into the future. So thank you for joining us for a bit of a snapshot of what's going on in search and rescue volunteering, and have a lovely afternoon. Thanks everyone.
Thank you, and thank you to the 5 organisations.
Yeah, absolutely. Bye.